Hello and welcome to the BA Sports Podcast. Today I have a very special guest, a reoccurring guest of the program. He's a writer, podcaster, a fantasy football guru, and it is none other than Jim Coventry of Rotowire. Good morning, Jim.
Excited to be here. Thanks for having me. It's always a great day to talk football.
Yes, so first off, we're going to get it started kind of going round by round through the NFL draft fantasy preview, kind of seeing what we're seeing in ADP as of right now. Training camp is just starting off and the preseason's approaching, and then the NFL season's going to be here before we know it. So let's start off with round one. Round one, I'm kind of seeing a top eight of the same players around consensus wise. I want to see if you're seeing the same thing, Jim. It's kind of like Christian McCaffrey, CD Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, Brees Hall, Justin Jefferson, Bijan Robinson, and maybe you can throw Monra in there at eight as like a consensus top eight. Are you seeing the same thing?
I'm on Ra's ADP. If you're looking at micro ADP, the last couple weeks, he's gone up. He's going ahead of Jefferson in average drafts right now. You're right. Over the course of the entire summer, the ADP is like where Jefferson's still ahead. But if we're just going on like the last week or two, which I usually do that for my friends at Fantasy Mojo, .com, they grab FFPC data from the last 5 days, and it's crazy. But yes, Amon Ra is now moving ahead, which to me I know Justin Jefferson doesn't have the best quarterback situation in the world, but he's
Mhm.
still Justin freaking Jefferson.
Yeah, he can get open. He is the best wide receiver in football, I think, and I think any QB can get him the ball. So I think he's kind of being really undervalued, and that may be a player that you could target kind of in the middle to late first round, depending on where he's falling, because no one wants to reach for him in probably the top five unless they feel confident in his ability and the quarterback's ability. But I mean, that offensive scheme they have, and Justin Jefferson's familiar with that, and he is the best wide
Mhm.
receiver in football. But who are you looking to target? If you have, say, a top five pick, who are some of the guys that you want to look out for?
So I went through a couple different phases of drafting this summer. Early phase, it was I just wanted to pound wide receivers early and not think twice about it. The more I've drafted, and I draft quite a bit, it's now if I could get what we call one of the hero running backs, I'm feeling a lot more confident. So if I do draw the one pick or even the two or three, and sometimes he falls, obviously Christian McCaffrey, I'm going to just say, you know what? Yeah, he might be getting a little older. Take the injury risk. He hasn't been hurt in a couple of years, but still. But then the other hero running backs I would take near that top of the draft. If Brees Hall and Bijan Robinson, one of them is usually almost always there. I'm very happy to build that way. So that being the earliest part, certainly there are drafts I've already taken. CD Lamb if I had the two pick, and I've taken like Jamar Chase if I've had the four pick. But I'm really liking that hero running back approach, and then I don't deal with my running back two for a long time in the draft. I'm going to cobble that together. So that's the first five picks, kind of my approach.
Yeah, I've been seeing that too. I've been seeing like the hero RBs are Bijan, Brees, and CMC. After that, it gets a little hairy, and I've been looking like round two and round three. I don't feel comfortable with some of the guys. I feel like some of those guys going in that range are kind of getting overvalued right now. And these three guys in the first round, they provide a solid floor and a really high ceiling, and they can compete with these wide receivers that are going this high because they see a lot of targets, and that is key in PPR leagues, especially. Now non PPR is a little different, where you could value the running backs a little higher than they even are going right now. And I do like taking a running back out of these three. That is kind of my tier one running backs, and I think it's probably everyone's tier one. I know some people want to throw in maybe Saquon, maybe Jonathan Taylor. Jameer Gibbs is a stretch. But as we approach kind of the late round one, I want to hear your thoughts. Would you just rank these three receivers: AJ Brown, Puka Nakua, and Garrett Wilson? We're kind of seeing those guys go at the end of round one, maybe beginning of round two.
Yes, and it is the consensus, as you're saying. AJ Brown is a player I am extremely high on last year. AJ Brown is averaging well over 1,400 yards in his 2 years with Philadelphia with Jalen Hurts. And last year, Brown was on almost a 2,000-yard pace through about week 8, and then whether it was Nick Sirianni or Brian Johnson running the offense, I don't think we have clarity of that. Once defenses realized all the Eagles wanted to do is throw deep, they put a shell over the top. The coaches had no answers, and AJ Brown had a terrible end of the season. Not his fault. This year, we bring in Kellen Moore. Yes, Moore does like to attack downfield, but he also builds an underneath game predicated on that. I believe AJ Brown is tied with a few other superstar receivers as being the best receiver in the NFL. They just do it different ways. I think AJ Brown is undervalued at a late first round pick. So I put him first in that group. Second, I am going to go with Garrett Wilson because he had look, it's not his fault. He had no quarterback last year. He had a ton of targets. The production wasn't great, but you can't get yards after the catch if the ball is behind you, if the ball is way over your head. And so he would get some catches, but he didn't even get a high catch rate because the passes were so bad. So even if Aaron Rodgers, for some reason, can't play the whole season, and I know he's not great, but having Tyrod Taylor as a backup, Tyrod Taylor is better than anything the Jets had last year. So I think Garrett Wilson, we're finally going to see that season we were hoping for last year. I am putting Puka Nacua third. And obviously, he had a legendary rookie season. There's a lot of variables with him. First of all, if the talk that Cooper Cup really wasn't healthy last year, and if Sean McVay is right that Cooper Cup is fully healthy this year, then that's going to be a big target. And we saw from like week 5 to about week 12, Puka Nakua was not going off because Cooper Cup was seeing target volume. And then Nakua, remember, he played a full season, but he was laid out on the sidelines a lot last year. And if he doesn't miss out on getting hit and it's too much for my liking, he eventually is going to break down from that. Finally, I think he's also more dependent on his quarterback than most, having Matthew Stafford. So I'm putting Puka as a deep third in these three.
Yep, I agree with that ranking. I really am liking AJ Brown in this Eagles offense with Kellen Moore. Kind of get into it later with Devontae Smith and why I really like it. And now I want to hear your thoughts on Jameer Gibbs, kind of going in this early round two. Uh, would you take him at all at this value? I feel like he's being way overvalued. Like, sure, he did great last year. He had a couple great games, but David Montgomery wasn't healthy the full season. And those are the games that we saw him break out. It's kind of taking a risk and having a high reward and just hoping that they give him more touches and that David Montgomery takes a step back and maybe he gets hurt. I don't know, but I think he's being overvalued. Overvalued. What about you?
Yeah, as you're saying, and for a little more background, obviously McCaffrey, Brees Hall, Bijan Robinson, Jonathan Taylor, Saquon Barkley, other than some garbage carries, they're not splitting any work.
Hmm.
And Jameer Gibbs may be a superstar, but David Montgomery from week 10 on and was kind of relegated, but it was still 30 snaps a game for Montgomery. And Montgomery was getting a touch on over half of those snaps. Montgomery's going to have a role. And if the Browns somehow can improve on defense and they play with leads, which they didn't always do last year, you have to think Montgomery's their grinder back late in the game. The ice game's down. Why would you want to get Gibbs hurt? You need him explosive. And so Gibbs, although now he is the backfield leader, he gives up way too much work. And yes, there were double digit touchdowns last year for Jameer Gibbs, but David Montgomery is still going to be a factor there. And those are hard to predict year to year. So, like you're saying, I think we're drafting Jameer Gibbs at his absolute ceiling, but there's floor that people are not really putting in that. And with your first round picks and early second, I really think you want to minimize that floor, and I think there's more than we should have.
Yep, I agree. I for sure would rather have Jonathan Taylor and Saquon Barkley. And going into round two, kind of now we get into the Devonte Adams, Marvin Harrison, Chris Olave. Do you like out of those three, who do you like the most going kind of at the top of round two right now?
So I kind of missed out on one name because I was. Did you mention Drake London as one of those names?
Drake London as well. No, but
Yes.
he is there.
Because I want him in that group because he's now you could take a full summer ADP and it could look like London's like a second round pick. He is going at the turn in a lot of drafts. So I want to put him in that group because I do believe Drake London has some real special value. In each of his first 2 years in the league, there were a number of games he had 8 or more targets. as a rookie 2 years ago, he averaged 6 catches for 90 yards. Last year, when he had 8 or more targets, he averaged 6 catches for 86 yards. So whenever he gets the ball, he is very, very productive. But remember, he was catching passes from Desmond Ritter, Taylor Heineke. The ball was not thrown optimally. This year, we bring in Zach Robinson to coach the offense. Some of that Rams style offense. We bring in Kirk Cousins, not worried about the Achilles. It's an injury that saps explosiveness. He never was explosive. So that said, London, in my mind, goes from that 110 target range probably to the true alpha range of 140 to 150. And I think he's going to go through the roof. And then the second one in that group, Chris Olave. He hasn't had 1,150 yards in a season in 2 years. I get it. New offenses here. Clint Kubiak comes in. They're going to do some downhill running, a lot of play action, but off that play action, that offense by Clint Kubiak's dad, Gary Kubiak, that has always gotten an alpha open quickly off the play action. And Chris Olave, similar to London, when Olave had 9 or more targets in all but one game, he was at least 86 yards. So I like those two very much. Devontae Adams, look, not his fault, but with the bad quarterback play, and even though he had 170 plus targets, the production with those quarterbacks, I don't think gives him the upside we'd like.
I agree with that. Yeah, Devontae is a little risky in this range, in my opinion. I probably would rather have Marvin Harrison Jr., who has maybe a higher ceiling than Devontae just because he's young and
Mhm.
there's a lot of targets to go around in that Arizona offense with the departure of Marquise Hollywood Brown. Kyler Murray's coming back. It's really, in my opinion, Marvin Harrison Jr. and Trey McBride competing for targets in that offense. They don't really have much else like that could be a true alpha wide receiver. And I do really love Chris Olave and Drake London. In our last episode that we released yesterday, we talked about the addition of Zach Robinson to that Falcons offense and how he can play with those weapons. And we really did like that. And yeah, I can't wait to see how this Falcons offense functions. And now keep going into the second round, we start seeing Kyron Williams, Travis Etienne, and Devon Achane, some running backs that are kind of worrying me in this range. And
Mhm.
this is kind of why we were talking about earlier. We like the hero RB. I like those top three running backs. After that, it gets a little hairy. And I think Kyron Williams is being a little overvalued here, mostly because he went undrafted last year. And people don't realize that he substantially outperformed his average draft position last year because of the backfield that he was in, and they kind of gave him all the carries, but now they drafted a running back and he could split the carries. It's a little concerning, and I want to hear your thoughts on that, Jim, because Kyron Williams, I know some people really like him, and it's kind of a high risk in my opinion.
Kyron Williams 2 years ago as a rookie, they needed him. They were trying to get him into the lineup. And obviously, he missed the beginning of the season with an injury. When he came in, they gave him a couple games of touches. He was not productive. And then they limited him to very low touch counts down the stretch while Cam Akers was there. Well, last year, Sean McVay, and if anybody didn't think Sean McVay was a genius before last year had to be the final point because he figured out two things. First of all, Puka Nakua on any other NFL team would have not gotten 400 yards. He got 1,400 yards. So, first of all, that was one. But the other two is Kyron Williams. So, what McVay figured out was the league was starting to figure out ways to defend the run with light boxes. They were shooting gaps really well. The zone runs were not having the same effect, even though the defense didn't have a lot of bodies. Well, what McVay figured out, we're going to run a lot of duo. That's downhill running. And the point of that is you get to the point of the attack before the defense can really get set and gang up on it. You really quick hit them. And Kyron Williams, who wasn't good in his time as a rookie, looked like Superman last year. So I begin to think, how much was Williams and how much was the system? And also the interior three linemen for the Rams, they weighed over 1,000 pounds. It was a designed idea to attack defenses. So I think Kyron Williams is a good running back, and the numbers were absolutely incredible. But that said, Blake Corum comes in. Now with Blake Corum, all of a sudden, maybe he's better than Kyron Williams. And if there's an open competition of any type, and if McVay sees, oh, they're close to as good, maybe Corum's better. why would he not give him more? Because remember, when we started last year, Akers and Kyron Williams were both heavily involved in week one. It wasn't one running back's backfield. So, yes, like you're saying, long winded way of saying it, Kyron Williams, I just don't know that the ceiling will remain there this year.
Yep. And honestly, would you rather just grab Blake Corum late rather than taking Kyron in this range and grab a wide receiver like the four we talked about?
There's no doubt. The second round after the beginning of it is definitely about wide receivers. That's where I want to go. Now, in the second round of a lot of drafts, Jonathan Taylor and Saquon Barkley will fall. And if you don't get that hero running back, I do believe I like Barkley better as a hero running back than Taylor. But that said, if you have to have that running back, you want receiver in the first round. And this, in my mind, is your last chance because, again, the volume's going to be there. Barkley is going to finally not have the whole defense gunning out to stop him. Matter of fact, the defense is worried about everybody else but Barkley, and he's going to have a line. And the last time Kellen Moore was in Dallas a couple of years ago, the running backs got 20% of the targets. So I think that's your last chance at a hero running back if you're going that way. And it's fine if you don't get one. But like you said, Brady, otherwise, it really is about getting the wide receivers in the second round.
Yep. And speaking of a wide receiver in the second round, do you see Nico Collins going in this range? And are we overvaluing him because of the crowded offense now? We've got Nico, we've got Stephon Diggs getting in there now, and we've got Tank Dell. Is this Houston offense going to be too crowded for all three to meet their ADP, like, and provide value for drafters in this?
The market is already making a stand on this. And in the last couple of weeks, Nico Collins has fallen into the third round. He's fallen out of the second. He's fallen into the third. The market is really micro adjusting these players on the fly. And I think the longer we get into like August, I think Nico Collins could fall like to the end of the third round because of the uncertainty there. That said, we saw Collins, and he missed a couple games, but on 110 targets, we saw a player put up almost 1,300 yards. And Nico Collins is a perfect fit for Bobby Slowick's offense. Yes, they scheme them open, but Collins also has the ability on his own. But the second thing is he's a demon after the catch. Amazing. And that whole offense is predicated. You think of Brandon Ayuk, you think of Debo Samuel. Well, Collins isn't like either of them. He's kind of bigger and stronger. But you saw last year, he can win on those types of plays, deep, intermediate, and short. And I think ultimately they will have plenty of two receiver sets, but Collins will always be on the field when he's healthy. And so I think he has the ability to maintain that 110 targets and that high efficiency. But we're not going to see crazy targets. But the fact he's already done it in that scenario with less than targets, that makes me optimistic.
I do like that. And just to point out, there are some quarterbacks that actually have supported three top 24 wide receivers, mainly Peyton Manning in 2004 and 2003. He had Reggie Wayne, Marvin Harrison, and Brandon Stokely, all top 16 wide receivers. And then in 2013, Demarius Thomas, Eric Decker, and Wes Welker, all top 21 wide receivers. Peyton Manning finished as the QB2 in 2004, QB1 in 2013. Now, we haven't seen that recently with quarterbacks, but we have seen quarterbacks support two top 24 wide receivers. Most recently, with Matthew Stafford, Robert Woods, Cooper Cup. That's been one of them. I believe Devontae Smith and AJ Brown did it last year. Yeah, they did it last year. So like there is potential here for two out of the three, but I don't know if all three can. I do like Nico Collins the best. I had him last year on one of my teams, and he was so good in some weeks, and I think he can keep performing at that level. And if he keeps falling, I really like him even more. I probably wouldn't take him at round 2, but like you said, he's gonna keep falling probably because people are gonna see, "Oh my gosh, there's 3 wide receivers in this offense. Maybe we shouldn't take him this high." And as he falls, I think he rises on my board, in my opinion, to take him in this range. And now round 3, we're kind of seeing where the first tight end and quarterback go off the board. Jim, would you take a tight end or a quarterback in round 3?
So I don't fault anybody who decides to go that route. There is a tactical advantage of having your Josh Allens, your Jalen Hurts, maybe even your Patrick Mahomes. I get it. I get it. I don't like the opportunity cost to miss out on the running backs and receivers. I still feel I could do damage at quarterback later in the draft. But once those top end running backs or wide receivers are off the board, it's a problem. And I do want to make one quick note about the tight end position. In From 2020 to 2022, 3 year span, the tight end one overall gave you at least a 60 PPR point per game edge over the number two. And then the top two overall, it was a massive chasm before the tight end three overall. Last year was similar to 2019. Last year, sure, Sam Laporta might have been the tight end one. I get it. He only had 234 fantasy points of PPR. In those prior years, 2020 to 22, the overall tight end one had at least 297 PPR points. 234 is a mile away from that. But we also saw last year, we saw six tight ends all within 30 PPR points of each other. So there no longer is this number one, number two, and then everybody else. Now I really believe we have a consolidation of about six or so tight ends that are similar. Therefore, I won't attack tight end at this point.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a little too early, especially on Sam Laporta. Maybe if you're feeling confident in Travis Kelsey and want to pull the trigger on him
Mhm.
around this range, you can, but it's too early for my liking. Travis Kelsey's actually going around late round three, early round four right now, from what I'm seeing. And I last year did pull the trigger on Josh Allen, and he worked out for me somewhat, but I pulled it on him kind of late round three, and it worked out for me in some leagues, but in some, I mean, like quarterback last year was not the greatest. I think quarterback this year is going to be much better. I think we're going to see a kind of adjustment of the quarterbacks having a better value, and so I think I can make like do damage later. I do like Anthony Richardson a little later. I even like some of the undervalued rookies later on, just taking a flyer on them, especially Jaden Daniels, maybe super late, but he's going a little too early for my liking right now.
Mm.
But round three, yeah, I think I'd rather go maybe a running back or a wide receiver, unless you're feeling confident. Some of the wide receivers going in this range: DJ Moore, DK Metcalf, Jalen Waddle. I do see Brandon Ayuk here. Jim, what wide receivers out of kind of these round three range do you like?
DJ Moore is going down, down, down in ADP. And I think the fantasy community has a disconnect with real football. I think they see Keenan Allen came in, Romo Dunze came in. I really don't even mind what Caleb Williams is because even if he like misses what we thought he might be, it's going to probably be better than Justin Fields and Tyson Bagent. And Moore put up 1,300 yards. As to the competition, and here's the disconnect with the fantasy community. People really probably didn't watch a lot of Carolina Panthers football when DJ Moore was there. They might not even have watched a lot of Chicago football when DJ Moore was there. DJ Moore is a legitimate NFL top 10 receiver. He is dynamic on every type of route. When the ball is thrown to him anywhere near his body, he's a running back with the ball in his hands. His yards after the catch were terrible last year because the passes were inaccurate. But DJ Moore still went for 1,300 yards. He can win deep, and that said, Keenan Allen, great possession receiver. He got a lot of targets from Justin Herbert, but they had nobody else. DJ Moore is going to dominate targets. Romo Dunze may be a superstar, but DJ Moore already is. So I love him. And Jalen Waddle, I don't want to sleep on him either because a couple of years ago, he had 1,300 yards on limited targets. Last year, if you watch those Miami games, even when Waddle was on the field, he was always limping on the sideline. There was something wrong with him all year. So at 1,100 yards, yeah, he was a disappointment last year at ADP. And his ADP is actually creeping up as well because people are kind of onto it that he probably wasn't 100%. But at Waddle, with that brilliant speed after the catch, I see him in that range as well, Brady.
Yeah, I do like DJ Moore. DJ Moore, I love watching him in Carolina. Love watching him in Chicago. If I mean, like you said, if you watch the guy, you can tell he is a top receiver in this league. He is in his prime. Keenan Allen is aging. I kind of don't like drafting those older wide receivers just because they're not as quick. Like, sure, Keenan Allen is a great route runner, probably one of
Mhm.
the best route runners in the league, but I love DJ Moore a lot more. And
Yes.
Romo Dunze, I mean, It's tough for rookies to get going. They got to get adjusted to the league. I think Caleb Williams does make an impact on this offense. I talked about it in my prior episode, and I really do like him as well, just because of all the weapons he's got. And I think, he can be really valued as a QB2 in superflex leagues. And that's kind of where I was targeting him for my superflex league, is grabbing him as kind of a guy I can take in a later round and provide value for me in a superflex league with all these weapons. I'd some other guys going in this range, Josh Jacobs, Rashad White. Those are some running backs. You also see Stephon Diggs and Cooper Cup kind of creeping in here. Isaiah Pacheco is also. I would say I like Isaiah Pacheco out of Rashad White, Pacheco, and Josh Jacobs. What about you, Jim? Going in this range for running backs?
Yeah, I'm trying to avoid all three of them. I really want a receiver here. The only
Mhm.
thing about Pacheco, and he was wonderful, but after the end of his rookie season, he had foot and shoulder surgeries. Last year, during the season, he missed was a game or two, a shoulder surgery. He runs very violently, and he's a little dude, and you can already tell the injuries are piling up. Now he's been on the field most of the time, but if he continues to run that way and take those hits, it's a matter of time. Very talented, like I said, I can see why you like him there. Josh Jacobs, other than the year when his fifth year option was declined by the Raiders, and it looks like he trained like he was playing for the ultimate payday. The 3 years that surrounded that career year, he's barely 4 yards a carry. His broken tackle rate was below average. His yards after contact were well below average, and that was behind a good run blocking Raiders offensive line. Now in Green Bay, I don't know that Josh Jacobs is very good. He can catch the ball, but he's not a great running back. And they didn't spend the 88th pick is not a throwaway pick. And they spent the 88th pick on Marshawn Lloyd. And this team, even when they had Aaron Jones, they always gave him a timeshare. And I don't know why they would change that when a 26-year-old Josh Jacobs is there when they had a 26-year-old Aaron Jones and it was that situation. So I'm worried about him.
I have to agree on that one. Josh Jacobs does worry me. I have heard a lot of buzz around Marshawn Lloyd. At the talk around Packers training camp, and as it's approaching, that he is looking very good and they really like him. So I like taking him as a handcuff in a later round, and I think he could provide value. I think I would go wide receiver in this round, honestly. It really depends on what you need, but like we were saying, I think you try and jump on a top five running back probably early on, and then go wide receiver heavy, because that's what I've been seeing when I've been doing mock drafts. Is at first, I was kind of going wide receiver, wide receiver, wide receiver, because I did that last year. I went like three wide receiver and then took running back later and kind of just threw it off and went zero RB. But now I think I want one of those top guys. And this is where you can find wide receiver value in this range of the draft. As we approach into round four, more wide receiver values coming our way. Kind of see Devontae Smith, a lot of QBs going right now. Debo Samuel's in this range, and I want to talk about Devontae Smith because I really like Devontae Smith, wide receiver 19 last year, wide receiver 21 in points per game. He's going as wide receiver 23 right now in ADP. I think this offense steps up with Kellen Moore there. Last year, Keenan Allen and Mike Williams were both top 10 in fantasy points per game before Mike Williams went down with an injury. And I think Kellen Moore can unlock this offense even more and provide a lot of value for these two wide receivers, AJ Brown and Devontae Smith. I want to hear your thoughts on this Eagles offense, or who you like in this range, Jim, for wide receiver, running back, quarterback.
This is again a receiver solid round. And when you mentioned Devontae Smith, he has a great floor. And in his last couple of years, he had an 1196 and 7. Last year, at 1066 yards and 7. He's going to get you that 1,100 yards. He's going to get you that 7 touchdowns. I don't know how much more ceiling there is, but that's a good number. If you're telling me the fourth round for that receiver and I'm getting that number, to me, that's fair value because A.J. Brown is the superstar. Devontae Smith, he's limited. His size is always going to make it. They have to have specific middle of the field routes. They don't want to run him into the traffic routes. He's tiny. He's
Mhm.
very slight of frame. And so I think they try to avoid that. And so they keep him a lot of possession routes on the outside. Now you'll see occasionally him run some deep overs into the middle of the field. Those are less contact areas. He had a couple big drops in those last year, but that just happened. But I think Smith is a very strong play. You mentioned DK Metcalf, another player with a floor. I think that 1,300-yard season he had in 2020, I think we can make that the outlier because every other season he's like 1,000, 1,100 yards. Again, very good numbers. So I think that's a good way to look. If you hadn't yet addressed running back, though, this would be your shot to get a volume based floor play with some ceiling in Joe Mixon. He goes over to Houston. And the whole thing with Houston is Bobby Slowick runs the offense. That was from the 49ers tree. They run a lot of two running back sets, not to run the ball. Andrew Beck comes in like Kyle Juszczyk does in San Francisco. They motion him out as a blocker to take out certain linebackers. Well, Mixon's going to get volume here. And with the receivers the Texans have, teams can't load the box on them. They're going to have to be very concerned about that. So Mixon's averaged over 300 touches, I believe, the last 3 years, and he's averaged about 50 catches. The two running backs last year had over 40 catches. So I think Mixon, if you don't want that receiver and you neglected running back, I think Mixon is a great floor play. He's typically healthy.
Yep. Do you see who is it? James Cook going in this range as well? Is that a player you see going around this range or maybe a little later?
Cook will go in this range at a draft. The thing that scares me about James Cook, I believe his last 5 or 6 games, after he had a good workload, he averaged 2.64 yards per carry in those last 5 or 6 games. And it told me what we worried about before the season. James Cook is not a bell cow. He's a
Mhm.
very good rotational back. And the more work you give a player like that, we begin to see him slow down because that's why they're not bell cow backs, right? And the team drafted Ray Davis. And Ray Davis, I didn't like his profile coming out, but for the team fit in Buffalo, he's perfect. Quick downhill, powerful, good vision. And that's exactly what they need because defenses, again, are going to play the pass because of Josh Allen. And we saw last year, the team got Latavius Murray involved until he got injured. Damian Harris was involved. They even shook the tires on Leonard Fournette late. But they want to involve somebody. And those backup running backs in Buffalo were getting many weeks with 25 to 40 snaps, which is significant. And on the year, those second running backs had 16 carries inside the 5 yard line. So I think if Ray Davis can just do a little bit, Cook's going to see enough limitations in his workload that it's going to make his upside get capped.
Yeah, I could see that. And I had him last year and I didn't have him as one of my starters. I kind of took him later on and he provided value here and there, but he's going a little higher now. And it's going to be hard for him to pay off this ADP, which is really why I do like wide receiver here. A wide receiver I'm not a fan of though in this range is kind of Malik Neighbors. He's creeping up
Mhm.
in this range. Like, sure, he's the alpha wide receiver for Daniel Jones, but it is Daniel Jones. And I know on Hard Knocks, I talked about this in the previous episode. They said that they're going to let Daniel Jones sling it. That's what they said they're going to do. So we'll see about that. But it concerns me. Malik Neighbors is a good wide receiver, but he is a rookie. And this offense, I don't know. I really like the Giants defense, and I think they're going to kind of play through that defense. And so I think that defense keeps games close enough to where they're not going to have to throw the ball a ton. Whereas like the Cardinals with Marvin Harrison Jr. and that rookie situation, that defense concerns me a little bit more. And I think they're going to have to throw a little bit more and play some catch up in Arizona. But yeah, Malik Neighbors kind of concerns me. I do see George Pickens, Zay Flowers as we approach the fifth round, kind of creeping up these boards. George Pickens is going to be the number one wide receiver in Pittsburgh, does not have to compete with Deontay Johnson in targets anymore. Do you like George Pickens or Zay Flowers in this range, Jim? Kind of going into round five?
So a lot of people are worried about George Pickens because Arthur Smith is in town. And the line is that receivers rarely see more than 110, 115 targets as an alpha in his offense. But that said, when Arthur Smith was a coordinator in Tennessee, and yes, AJ Brown didn't see a ton of targets when he was there. Now he missed some games too, so there's that. But AJ Brown was very impactful. George Pickens is really, in my mind, the only game and talent receiver because Arthur Smith ran 80% heavy personnel sets, meaning he had one or two receivers on the field. The Steelers really don't have another receiver to fit. Roman Wilson's a slot. Well, if you're playing heavy personnel 80% of the time, there is no slot. And Calvin Austin is tiny. And people talk about Van Jefferson. I'm like, next. Van Jefferson's not a, he's not a factor. So George Pickens is going to probably see a little more in terms of what the Arthur Smith receiver would see typically. But I think Pickens with a big improvement in quarterback play from Kenny Pickett and Mason Rudolph to who's not a great quarterback, Russell Wilson, but way better than what he had. And the way that we know Arthur Smith uses those play action, slants, overs, that's a perfect fit for George Pickens. Love him this year.
Yep, I do like George Pickens. I think he provides some good value here, and he's going to see a lot of targets. Some players as we creep into round five, we start seeing maybe C.J. Stroud going, Amari Cooper, Ken Walker, Alvin Kamara, Mark Andrews, T. Higgins, Christian Kirk. I kind of do like T. Higgins and a little bit of Dalton, or no, sorry, T. Higgins and Ken Walker in this range. I do think Ken Walker provides some good value here, and he is in a Seattle offense who has a new offensive coordinator. So we're going to see how they unlock him and kind of give him the ball more. But he injuries are kind of concern. I want to hear your thoughts. Is Dalton Kincaid in round five a little too high? Would you wait a little bit? I know he's probably going to be the number one or number two target hog in this offense because he's just a familiar face, and they lost Stephon Diggs, which provides a lot of targets. Do you think this is too high for Dalton Kincaid?
I don't think it's too high. There's nothing wrong with taking Dalton Kincaid here. I don't have many shares. Again, in this round, it's going to be a running back or receiver most likely because of the value that's on the board. And but there's nothing wrong with taking because Kincaid could see and should see over 100 targets, maybe not much over that, but he should see in that range. And there's great value in that. And the amount of zone that obviously teams are playing 73% league wide. Bills are going to see plenty of that. And Kincaid is a seam player, which gets into the holes of the zone. So there's a lot of value there. So you could definitely consider taking him. I will tell you, you mentioned a number of good players there. Real quick, on Ken Walker. What we could tell from the roster is they got rid of Colby Parkinson, they got rid of Will Disley. So that tells me a team that used to be 35% two tight end sets with Ryan Grubb, this is likely the roster's configured to be three receivers. What that means for Ken Walker is he should see lighter boxes than he saw last year. And he is more of an explosive type runner. So that definitely I should help Ken Walker.
Yeah, watching him at Michigan State, man, he can move really quick. He's super fast and he can break on a hole like no one else. And I think, with this new offensive coordinator, it's going to be exciting to see how he progresses in his NFL career and also how Jackson Smith and Jigba progresses in his NFL career. So I think those two are going to be fun to watch in this offense. And now we're going to go into five through seven, kind of. Ramondre Stevenson's going in round six. Who do you like in round six, Jim? I do think Ramondre Stevenson could provide some value. I also see Calvin Ridley going in this range, and I think he's in a new offense and he's got a new quarterback, and it's going to be interesting to see how the Titans attack this with Calvin Ridley and DeAndre Hopkins. But I think Ridley benefits a little bit of having Hopkins there to take some coverage off of him, and they're going to have to cover everyone now. And it's kind of like the Julio Calvin Ridley situation. Maybe Ridley provides a little more value here. Would you take him in round six? Or is that a little too high for Calvin Ridley in this Titans offense?
I'm a little cooler on Ridley than most. He has one season with more than 1,016 yards. He's pushing close to 30 right now, and I think a lot of people get lost on that one, that he's aging and he's not, the young guy he was anymore. And, and I like how you mentioned the Julio Jones playing with Ridley. But Hopkins is so different. The reason that Julio scared defense because he could shred them over the top for an 80-yard play if they were on their own 20 at any time. And so it was a level of fear. DeAndre Hopkins is basically now one of the best possession receivers we see. He doesn't, his hands, he doesn't drop anything. He boxes out. And I really wonder. Will Levis, once a little film was out on him, we saw why he was a sketchy prospect, and it was not good. Teams would drop people back. He struggled to throw short and intermediate. Teams knew that, said, "Go ahead, beat us there," and he couldn't. And now that said, I don't think Levis is very good. He's learning his second offense in 2 years, and say what you want about, the new coaching staff coming over from Cincinnati, but, that offense may not be good for Will Levis right now. It might take him time, and the other thing is, I don't know if Will Levis in any universe could support 2 receivers. So I'm very concerned. It's more of it's too many red flags for me. I think in Hopkins is the one going later than Ridley. And
Mhm.
we're talking PPR leagues. I can't see a world where DeAndre Hopkins does not have more receptions than Ridley, just because if you're a young quarterback who's not good, you're just going to throw the ball to Superman and just hope for the best. And I could be wrong, but that's just kind of how I see it.
Yeah, that's what Will Levis did last year was throw Hopkins away, and not to mention they have that connection from last year. Ridley and Levis don't have that familiarity yet. Now maybe they get it, but it is a little concerning, especially in this range where you could probably get a guy like maybe Chris Godwin here who has some familiarity with Baker Mayfield. I do like him a lot in this range. Chris Godwin provides a good floor in this range, especially going around. Let's see, his consensus is like wide receiver 34. I think he can be a wide receiver three for you, a flex wide receiver. I think he provides good value in PPR leagues. So that's someone I really want to target in this range. Another guy going in this range is Jaden Reed. He's creeping up. I personally don't like the Green Bay Packers wide receivers going this high. Now, Jaden Reed is a good player, but this offense is super crowded, and I don't know if Jordan Love can support all of them. I'd rather take a Packers wide receiver later, like maybe Christian Watson or Dontavian Wicks. Those provide a little more value for me rather than taking Jaden Reed this early. Jim, is there anyone else you like in this round 6 range that you can think of?
I like Christian Kirk in this range. Christian Kirk, 1,200 yards roughly a couple years ago. He's on pace for that last year. Christian Kirk is the real deal. And again, we talk about the league playing 73% plus zone defenses. Christian Kirk is perfect for that. He plays a lot in the slot. He can line up outside when they're in two receiver sets, but he has great chemistry with Trevor Lawrence. I believe he's the most consistent receiver in that offense. I know they bring the young guy Brian Thomas in. Fine, they had Ridley last year, so that's really not much difference. But Kirk just does nothing but produce since he's been over in Jacksonville. So I love him there. Hollywood Brown is another player that's in this range ish, and because he's sneaking up draft boards, like by again in micro ADP shows he's going up into this range. And Hollywood Brown, and he does miss some time. I get that. But talk about a perfect match for Patrick Mahomes. Nobody buys time like Mahomes. When Mahomes is out and he starts on the move, well, he's always looking downfield. And in his career, very few players understand how to get vertical when a play breaks down better than Hollywood Brown. And I think those two are going to have a real connection on a lot of levels in this offense.
I do too. And also with that Chiefs offense, Rasheed Rice, there's some concerns around him with what's going to happen. Is he going to get suspended? Marquise Brown is safely in that offense. And I think, he brings that Tyreek Hill vertical ability that Mahomes hasn't had in the past couple years. Sure, he had Marquez Valdez Scantling, but Marquez Valdez Scantling is not Marquise Hollywood Brown or Tyreek Hill. Those guys are way better in my opinion. And I think Mahomes can unlock Marquise Brown. I do like him going into round 7. I actually do like Deontay Johnson a little bit here. Now he has struggled with scoring touchdowns. This offense under Dave Canales, I do think Bryce Young takes a step forward. It's going to take some adjusting. But last year, Adam Thielen put up wide receiver 17 numbers, wide receiver 26 in points per game. Deontay Johnson's around wide receiver 36, wide receiver 3 range right now. So I think he provides a good floor and provides a younger boost to this offense, wide receiver core wise. They did take a wide receiver in round 2, I believe, but I think Deontay Johnson, he gets open a lot. And I think Bryce Young is going to be looking his way because Deontay Johnson seemingly was always open, and I think Bryce Young can deliver him the ball. This is probably the best QB Deontay Johnson has had because the Steelers quarterbacks weren't that great for him. I think Dave Canales helps this passing game just like he did last year with Baker, just like he did in Seattle the year before with Geno Smith. I expect the Panthers to be trailing a lot. They lost a big part of their defense in Brian Burns, who goes to the New York Giants. They replaced him with Jadeveon Clowney. He's older. He's a good player, but he is not Brian Burns. And sure, this secondary is pretty good. My concern with the secondary is, do they stay healthy? JC Horn has had some problems recently with his health. Now, he is a great player. I wish him the best, and I hope he has a healthy season. But this defense concerns me, and I think they're going to be in trailing game scripts a lot, which is why I like Deontay Johnson. He's going to get some garbage time in this round 7 range, and I think he could provide some value. Another player I'm seeing is Kyler Murray, Dak Prescott. That quarterback tier starts going in this range. And then you start seeing Najee Harris, DeAndre Swift, Jalen Warren. It's kind of a clutter of running backs, kind of committee running backs. I think DeAndre Swift probably has the clearest cut out of the committees. The Steelers running backs are like hit or miss. We don't know who's going to get the ball, but Arthur Smith is probably going to run it a lot. Jim, who are you seeing in this round 7 range that you like, don't like?
This is where I like to go for my quarterback, and Prescott and Kyler Murray are my 2 targets. Those are the 2 quarterbacks. I like one of them on my team. Prescott, we learned during Dallas's, I believe, week 6 bye last year. I don't give Mike McCarthy much credit, but I will here, because after week 6, he realized we can't consistently run the ball. So they went very pass heavy. Prescott in 7 of his last 12 games had at least 29 fantasy points. They moved CD Lamb wherever the advantageous matchup was, be it in the slot, on a weaker outside corner. And we saw Jake Ferguson growing as the season went on, but Prescott was super productive. So I love him there. Kyler Murray, can't sleep on him either. Murray comes back from an ACL. So you're going to see he missed a bunch of games last year. He missed about 6 games the prior year. It was the same injury as the ACL. So we shouldn't say give him an injury prone tag because one injury cost time in 2 years. It was the timing of the injury. Anyway, Murray had between 19 and a half and 25 fantasy points in 7 of his 8 starts. And he didn't have much weapons. Marquise Brown was hurt with a heel injury. Michael Wilson missed significant time. And the de facto number 1 receiver was Trey McBride. Well, Murray now gets Marvin Harrison. Michael Wilson was actually 5 of his first 8 games, he had over 50 yards with bad quarterbacks. The last 2 games with Murray, 65 yards per game for Michael Wilson, so he can play. And then there's McBride. Even James Conner had his only 2 good receiving games of the year with Murray. We had like 54 and a 65-yard game right around there. And so that was when Connor was doing nothing through the air all year. So Murray is going to be a year removed, a little more running. But I like Prescott and Murray here.
Yep, I do like those too. So in my keeper league last year, we basically penalize the way we penalize, if you want to keep someone this next year, you have to take them around prior. So I drafted CD Lamb in round 3, and I'm going to keep him for a round 2 pick. Well, I took Kyler Murray in round 18, and I'm keeping him for a round 17 pick this year. So I'm super happy about that. I think he provides great value. He's got good weapons around him with them drafting Marvin Harrison Jr. I do love Kyler Murray and Dak Prescott. I think the Cowboys are going to throw a lot. They don't have a running back that can carry the ball. Zeke is old. They lost Tony Pollard. I don't like the other guys around him. So yeah, I think the Cowboys keep with this pass happy offense, and CeeDee Lamb and Ferguson kind of are the 2 that come to my mind when Dak Prescott is targeting the Cowboys receivers. And now, as we go into rounds 8 and 11, this is kind of the bench depth that you want to build. Got to look out for bye weeks and kind of see what you need to address position wise and who you can take here that's going to add value that maybe you can trade for later. So in this range, kind of rounds 8 through 11, some guys I like. Jackson Smith and Jigba is a guy that I really like in this range. He provides a lot of value, I think, and can kind of break out this year, in my opinion. Tyler Lockett's going downhill. DK Metcalf is a staple of this offense, but last year we saw Jackson Smith and Jigba make some highlights, and he has that potential. And in his second year, I think he takes a step forward again. Another guy I like in this range, Lad McConkey, Tajay Spears, Trey Benson. These guys are going in rounds 8, 9, maybe 10. This adds some handcuffs and running back depth that could break out for teams this season. Tajay Spears is a guy I really like because he provides PPR value, and I think Tony Pollard's aging, and I don't really like Pollard this year. I like Tajay Spears a lot. I think they're gonna try and get him the ball a little bit more, but this Titans offense, under new offensive coordinator and new head coach, we're gonna see kind of them try to probably give Tajay Spears a little more work. Who are you liking in this rounds 8 through 11, Jim, to target and provide value?
Yeah, I'm definitely with you on Jackson Smith and Jigba. He's one of my breakout candidates of the year, probably one of the biggest ones I'm pushing. He had a seventh percentile average depth of target. Last year it was criminally low. We saw when he had more chances later in the season that worked. You mentioned Tyler Lockett. Tyler Lockett was only 16th percentile after the catch. Lockett had 122 targets, yet his yardage is one of the worst we've seen from him in years. So the volume padded the decline, but the new coaching system is not going to be like Pete Carroll. Let the veteran out there. Smith and Jigba is the number two here, and I believe he is the true first round pick he was in the NFL. So we're going to see a star here. Other players I like here. Look, if Jake Ferguson's falls into this range and you didn't get a tight end, jump on him because I do believe his role is going to grow. Dallas and Prescott have always loved the seam stretchers, and Ferguson is clearly that. If you miss out on Ferguson in that 8th through 11th round, you still need a tight end. Pat Fryermuth, I really believe this is a good breakout year from people. Will see Arthur Smith come in and they'll say, well, look, Arthur Smith destroyed Kyle Pitts. He used Pitts as a downfield threat, 99th percentile average depth of target, low percentage passes from bad quarterbacks. But remember, Jonnu Smith had 582 yards as a tight end in this offense. And Fryermuth is not going to be used the way that Pitts was because that's not the player he is. But Darnell Washington is another lineman. He's a tight end, but he's a lineman. So he's not going to be out there catching passes. And I said earlier when I talked about the heavy personnel and the lack of receiving depth, Fryermuth is the number two in that offense. And I think Fryermuth is going to be a good option. And then one more I'll give you here. Chase Brown at running back. I believe it's a good time to target him. Zach Moss came in. Zach Moss was good the last 4 games of 2022 with the Colts. And then the first 4 games he was good. And then all of a sudden, it like the reason he got kicked out of Buffalo, we saw it. He was about 3.92 yards per carry from week 5 on last year. He was an ordinary back. Chase Brown, limited sample size, but he was excellent in broken tackle rate, yards after contact. He's already a good receiver. I think it starts out as a timeshare, but I think the Bengals are going to realize that Zach Moss is not a very good running back, and Chase Brown is going to emerge as a top option for them.
I do like that Chase Brown call out. He was looking very good last year, and they just didn't give him the work because I mean Joe Mixon was there. But yeah, I think they didn't pay a lot for Zach Moss. So they're not losing out on a ton of money by cutting his carries down and having the younger guy emerge. I do like these younger running backs. They seem to always rise up where these older running backs kind of fall off once they reach around age 26, 27, unless you're like a superstar running back like Christian
Mhm.
McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley. I think they still provide good value. But as you get like a Zach Moss, like he hasn't been a Christian McCaffrey, a Saquon Barkley. So I think, yeah, they're going to split carries in Cincy. Another guy I like in this range is Khalil Shakir. Um, he can provide some wide receiver depth for you. He's a familiar face of Josh Allen.
Mm.
Josh Allen, Dalton Kincaid, Khalil Shakir, those are probably the two guys that come back. And Josh Allen has that rap with them to target them. They get some younger wide receivers in, but I think Khalil Shakir could provide some good value. Now, Jim, I want to hear your thoughts on Brock Bowers because Brock Bowers is going around this range and he could provide some value, but he is in a offense where the quarterback I'm kind of unsure of, the offensive coordinator kind of unsure of. It just it's kind of red flags for me, but he has the potential to do well in this offense just because of we saw him at Georgia. He was a star at Georgia, and he can play not only the tight end position, but they can put him out at the wide receiver position, and he can run routes out there. Do you like Brock Bowers going in this range?
I am avoiding Brock Bowers. If Devontae Adams could only turn 175 targets into 1,100 yards with that quarterback level of play, that's a massive red flag about accuracy, which is a problem. The other thing with the Raiders that concerns me is they did bring in Luke Getzey as the offensive coordinator, and he ran a high percentage of two tight end sets. So we're going to see Bowers and Mayer on the field. But here's the thing, the Raiders' ultimate game plan with Antonio Pierce, their head coach, we want to run the ball. We want to play defense. And we saw it on the Christmas Day game against Kansas City. They got out to a lead. Once through the second quarter, they like literally stopped throwing the ball. If they get leads, they are not going to throw the football. And if they do, it's probably going to Devontae Adams. So I think Bowers could have a few good games. If there's games the Raiders trail and they have to throw and it works out. But realistically, quarterback play and the game plan I expect from them on a regular basis, there's not going to be targets there.
Yep, I agree. It's gonna be tough, but we could see Zamir White maybe having a good year. Some other guys going in this range, running back wise, would you prefer Brian Robinson? Do you think he has a path to kind of get to that RB1, or is Austin Eckler kind of a concern for you?
Austin Eckler last year, and his problems weren't the injury, and I know the numbers told me why. The broken tackle rate and the yards after contact as a runner were terrible, but as a receiver, he was 88th percentile after the catch. So the fact he was still that as a receiver, it tells me he was healed from the injury. It's just that he's nearing 30. And he's done as a running back. And because he remember all those years Austin Eckler was asking for help, literally asking the team, get me a running back. And they tried and they failed. Everybody they brought in was bad. So all that work caught up to him. But that said, Eckler will be the full-time receiving back. He can still play that role. And that hurts Brian Robinson because Robinson could catch a little bit, but obviously Eckler is going to be the receiving back. And the offensive line is bad. They're probably going to trail a lot. And if that's the case, I think that Brian Robinson is gonna have a lot of bad game script. I think there's gonna be games where he only gets 7 carries because they're gonna have to probably go into their turbo package, which is probably gonna be Eckler. So I think both kind of cannibalize each other because Eckler, I don't think is gonna see a lot of rushing attempts because he simply can't do it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they're not gonna be running the ball a lot, I think. That defense isn't that great. I mean, sure, they got a whole new coaching staff, and Dan Quinn comes in as a good defensive coordinator from Dallas, but it's not the same defense he had in Dallas. This defense
Mm-mm.
is very concerning whenever I look at it. Uh, Kind of going into round 12, this is and later, this is where you find the hidden gems. This is where you find the Kyron Williams of last year. A guy that I really like that could emerge maybe in training camp and the preseason is Jaleel McLaughlin in Denver. The buzz around him in Denver has been kind of getting hyped up recently. And last year, he was very explosive. Also, Javante Williams, sure, he's a good back, but he wasn't a part of this Sean Payton coaching staff. They didn't bring Javante Williams in. They brought in Jaleel McLaughlin. And I think they could kind of see Jaleel McLaughlin creep into maybe an RB2 range if he gets the carries, but he's kind of a guy that can provide depth and maybe break out. It's just a guy you're going to take a flyer on at this rate, going this late in drafts. Like you got to take flyers on guys and hope that they might hit. Another guy that I do like is Josh Palmer. Now, granted, they're not gonna throw a ton, I don't think, in this Jim Harbaugh offense, but he provides good value here, and he has familiarity with Justin Herbert. And I like what I saw from him last year, and there are a ton of targets opening up on this offense, which is why I like him and Lad McConkey a little bit. But they aren't going to be a pass happy offense. They're going to try and run the ball a little bit more with Jim Harbaugh and this new coaching staff. Who are these guys that you're taking in rounds 12 or later, Jim, that you want to target that could hit for teams?
I will give you a very quick hit on a bunch of players. So I'll go through them quickly. I won't give a lot of analysis because of time. Kirk Cousins, I'm not worried about the Achilles. I said earlier in the show, it saps explosiveness. He doesn't have it. Pocket passer in a good situation. Another quarterback late, Deshaun Watson. He's averaged about on pace for 400 rushing yards per season over the last 2 years in limited play. I think that rushing floor helps him. Running back, love Kendre Miller this year. Even though Kamara had all the yards, he was 15th percentile broken tackle rate, 24th after contact. Miller looked good in limited work. Miller starts to cut in. Ray Davis of the Bills, I think that he's going to get a complimentary role behind James Cook, which will include some red zone work, a little deeper for depth. And I know you like Jaleel McLaughlin. If you're betting against Javante Williams, this wants to be a power running team based on their offensive design. Super, super, super late in the draft. Audric Estime, they drafted in the fifth round. He is a banger inside. And if Javante Williams continues to struggle, with making yardage on inside runs, Estime could be a big factor as well as the McLaughlin who you like. Very quickly at receiver, Jerry Judy steps into the Elijah Moore role, most likely 104 targets last year. Moore was only 30th percentile after the catch. Jerry Judy was 86. So if Jerry Judy gets that role, he could be very surprising. Very late receivers. Jermaine Burton of the Bengals, 4.45 speed, was in OTAs played in the slot. He had some off-field issues that made him drop to the third round of the draft. But with Chase and Higgins drawing attention, Burton should have room to roll. I mentioned earlier that Michael Wilson had at least 58 yards in 5 of his first 8 games with bad quarterbacks. He averaged 65 yards in the last 2 games with Kyler Murray. I think as a number 2 receiver, he has value. Last receiver, Wandale Robinson. Numbers were terrible last year, but he was coming off an ACL. After their week 13 bye, he had 55 or more yards in 2 of the last 3 games. Very good after the catch. Very good late steal.
I do like that. Another guy that I do like, Dontavian Wicks. He's going late. This is the Packers wide receiver that I want just because he's going super late and wouldn't want to take Jaden Reed. And that is kind of all the rounds for you guys. We pretty much went through the entire ADP of all the rounds and kind of provided who we like in certain ranges. Jim, where can they find your content on Rotowire and where can they follow you?
Two main places. You can follow me at Jim Coventry NFL on the X and most socials. Now, I work with Rotowire. I'm at Sirius XM Channel 87, the Fantasy Sports Channel weekends, Saturday and Sunday. You can catch me there. But Rotowire just launched a football only YouTube page, and we are putting out content every single day. Please consider subscribing and using notifications on that channel because we are really going to bring it to that channel this year.
That's good to hear, Jim. I'll definitely be subscribing to that. Thank you for coming on. We recapped everything. Thank you all for listening. Subscribe to Jim, follow Jim on X, subscribe to RotoWire on YouTube, follow their podcast on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure if you're not following the BA Sports Podcast, give us a follow on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Jim, thank you so much for coming on today. Your insight is incredible as always, and it's always a pleasure having you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and we're going to have a great season.
Can't wait. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and have a great day.